Imagine you're just days away from launching your debut album. You're this young acoustic duo. The momentum is finally building in your local scene. Your calendar's just packed with gigs.
Living the dream, basically.
You're finally ready to introduce your art to the world. And then a doctor walks into a sterile room and tells you that your immune system is about to be completely wiped out by chemotherapy.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Your entire public life, your tour, your momentum, it all just stops today.
Which is, devastating.
Absolutely. And for most bands, that is exactly where the Wikipedia page ends, right? It's just this tragic, what could have been footnote. But for the Canadian band, $100.
Also stylized as a $sign and the number 100, just to know.
Good catch, yeah. For them, that devastating moment was, it was actually just the prologue.
It really is the ultimate subversion of the standard music industry narrative.
Yeah.
We are so conditioned to expect this familiar trajectory, like the garage days, the lucky break, the inevitable ego clash.
And the reunion tour 10 years later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you look at the actual timeline of $100, you realize you're looking at something entirely different. You're looking at a masterclass in how severe constraints can forge completely unexpected brilliance.
Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive, designed specifically for you. Today, we're taking a seemingly brief but wildly dense source text about this Toronto-based alternative country band.
And it is a fascinating source.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore the complete life cycle of a creative project. We're going to look at how a group navigates unthinkable sudden adversity, how they emotionally and mechanically transform their entire sonic identity,
and how a band can ultimately serve as an incubator for entirely new musical evolutions.
Right.
And I just want to say, well, you might be tuning in hoping to discover some fantastic new music to add to your playlist, which you absolutely will.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the underlying mechanics of this story apply to anyone trying to build something.
Yeah, that's so true.
Sometimes the most profound lessons on how to pivot when your life just completely derails are hidden in the shortest histories.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start at the beginning to really understand the baseline here, which takes us to Toronto in the year 2006.
Right.
$100 begins not as some massive wall of sound ensemble, but as this highly stripped-down duo. We've got Simone Schmidt handling the vocals and Ian Russell playing acoustic guitar. And that's it. That is the entire band.
Which is an incredibly vulnerable setup.
Oh, completely.
If you think about the mechanics of the alternative country genre,
Sure.
It relies heavily on raw, unvarnished, literal storytelling.
Yeah.
So when you're just a duo, there's absolutely nowhere to hide on stage. You don't have a roaring drum kit to cover up a missed chord.
Or like a wall of distortion to mask a wavering vocal note or something.
Exactly. Every breath, every strum, every single lyric is completely front and center for the audience to scrutinize.
And they really lean all the way into that vulnerability. Like by 2007, they released their debut EP, fittingly titled Hold It Together.
Great title.
Yeah, but almost immediately after this release, just as they're trying to gain traction, their world violently halts. Ian Russell is diagnosed with leukemia.
Wow. And the reality of a leukemia diagnosis and the grueling systemic nature of the chemotherapy required to treat it, it means an absolute non-negotiable end to public performance.
Because it's not just about being tired, right?
No, not at all. Chemotherapy decimates your immune system. You literally cannot be in a crowded, poorly ventilated dive bar playing for an audience.
Right, you'd catch everything.
Exactly. The physical and medical toll just makes traveling, loading gear, and projecting energy out to a crowd night after night biologically impossible.
I want to focus on the mechanics of their reaction to this because the source material points out something crucial. They didn't stop being a band. They just stopped performing. Russell and Schmidt continued to write songs together throughout this entire terrifying medical ordeal.
Which is incredible.
It is. And let's ditch the cliche idea of a ship dropping anchor in a storm here. Think of their hiatus not as a paused clock, but as a coiled spring.
I like that.
They couldn't release any kinetic energy by performing out in the world, so every single song they wrote in that isolated room was just winding that spring tighter and tighter.
What's fascinating here is how physical limitations completely alter the architecture of a song.
How do you mean?
Well, when you're isolated from the world, facing down the very real specter of mortality and severe illness, your songwriting fundamentally shifts away from external validation.
Right, you're not writing a party anthem.
Exactly. You aren't writing a catchy chorus to get a Friday night crowd to dance and buy drinks. You're writing simply to process your immediate, terrifying reality.
That makes total sense.
The constraint of the illness forces the art to become incredibly dense. You're creating a stockpile of deeply personal, heavily weighted material because the music is functioning as a psychological lifeline, not a career stepping stone.
But see, that brings up a massive logistical challenge.
Right.
So the chemo ends, the medical lockdown lifts, you have this stockpile of intense, heavy songs forged in a room of sickness. How do you take those deeply introverted maps and suddenly broadcast them to the world?
And how they answered that specific question dictated the entire next phase of their existence. And it required a radical departure from everything they had done before.
They decide to step back into the light, and they cross paths with a musician and producer named Rick White, who invites them to record in his studio.
A huge turning point.
Yeah. Now, to pull this off, Ian Russell makes a choice that changes the fundamental DNA of $100. He doesn't just hire, like, a studio session player to add a tambourine.
No, he goes all in.
He essentially drafts the entire rhythm section from a group he used to play with called John Ray and the River.
He brings in a fully formed musical community. I mean, we are talking about taking the intimate acoustic duo and explosively expanding it into a massive 6 or 7-piece band.
Wait, let's group these new elements so you can understand what this actually sounds like. Suddenly you have Dave Clark driving the drums and Kyle Porter on bass,
Creating this massive, heavy sonic floor.
Right. Then you have Paul Mortimer layering in electric guitar and Jonathan Adjemian occasionally swelling in on the organ.
The organ adds so much texture.
It really does. And crucially, you have Stu Crooks playing the pedal steel, which, if you aren't familiar, is that sliding, weeping, atmospheric instrument that gives classic country its mournful, crying sound.
It's beautiful.
It is. But I have to push back on this logistical nightmare for a second. If you're listening to this and you've ever managed a project or even just planned a group dinner, you know that managing 7 people is incredibly difficult.
Oh, it's like herding cats.
Exactly. But Ian Russell is recovering from leukemia. Assembling a 7-piece band with pedal steels and organs sounds like a scheduling and physical nightmare, not a healing process. Wasn't this a massive, unnecessary risk? Why not just stay a low-maintenance duo?
Well, on paper, it sounds completely counterintuitive. I'll give you that.
Right.
But if you look at the emotional mechanics of what they were trying to achieve, it was an absolute necessity. Remember that coiled spring you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, winding tighter and tighter.
Exactly. An acoustic guitar alone simply cannot carry the sheer sonic weight of staring down mortality and surviving. The songs had outgrown the duo format.
No, wow. I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, if you have a lyric born out of fighting cancer, you don't want to whisper it over a delicate acoustic strum. You need the driving, vital heartbeat of a pounding drum kit.
You need to feel it in your chest.
You need the swelling, church-like chords of an organ to elevate the sound. You need the pedal steel to physically weep the notes you can't sing yourself.
So it's about matching the sonic architecture to the emotional weight, like throwing open all the windows and doors in a house that's been boarded up for a storm and inviting the whole neighborhood in to make as much noise as humanly possible.
It is a loud, kinetic celebration of returning to the land of the living. And when you put 7 talented musicians into a room with that kind of pent-up, survival-driven energy, it immediately fuels an incredibly intense period of creation.
And they do not waste a single second. On July 25, 2008, this newly minted 7-piece iteration releases their first full album called Forest of Tears on Blue Fog Recordings.
And it doesn't just quietly slip into the local Toronto music scene.
Not at all. A few months later, Forest of Tears is named a long-listed nominee for the 2009 Polaris Music Prize.
For listeners who might not be familiar with the Canadian music industry, we really need to contextualize what the Polaris Music Prize actually represents.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It is arguably the most prestigious artistic award in the country, and it operates on a very specific set of mechanics. It's judged by a massive jury of music critics, broadcasters, and experts, but the catch is that they judge purely on artistic merit.
So no popularity contests.
Exactly. They don't look at record sales, they don't look at genre, and they don't care about what label you're on.
And here is the real takeaway, the real aha moment about that nomination. The Polaris jury is effectively blind to your backstory, which means $100 didn't get nominated for a major national award out of sympathy for a cancer survivor. They got nominated because the severe constraint of a medical lockdown actually forced them to write tighter, more profoundly affecting music than they ever would have otherwise.
The art stood completely on its own 2 feet.
Absolutely.
The validation must have been incredibly potent. I mean, it proved that their massive pivot, taking the logistical risk of expanding to a 7-piece band, was working on the highest possible artistic level.
And instead of taking a breath to enjoy that success, they immediately doubled down.
They drop a couple of regional 7-inch singles, right?
Yeah, 14th Floor in 2009 and My Father's House in 2010, mostly just to keep the engine running. And then comes the second full album, Songs of Man, released on May 10th, 2011 by Outside Music.
A huge milestone.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The source notes that this entire second album is recorded in just 12 days at a studio called The Woodshed in Toronto.
Wow. If we connect this to the bigger picture, recording a full-length album with a 7-piece band in 12 days is an absolute high-wire act.
It's unheard of today.
In modern music production, bands often spend months in the studio. A drummer will play their part alone in an isolation booth to a click track. Then, days later, the bass player comes in and layers their part.
Yeah, it's super piecemeal.
Exactly. If someone messes up, you just digitally punch in a fix.
Yeah.
But recording in 12 days means they were likely playing live off the floor.
Which means all 7 of them are in the same wooden room, looking at each other, playing the song at the exact same time.
Right.
If the drummer hits the snare drum, that sound physically bleeds into the singer's microphone. If the bass player messes up 3 minutes into the song, you can't just fix it on a computer. All 7 of you have to stop, rewind, and play the entire song perfectly from the beginning.
It requires a staggering level of rehearsal and collective intuition.
It really does.
It's a musical sprint. You're trying to capture lightning in a bottle before the energy dissipates. And you have to wonder if this incredible urgency, this need to just plug in, blast it out, and commit it to tape in less than 2 weeks, was a direct psychological reaction to the hiatus.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
When your ability to make art is forcibly ripped away from you by a biological thread, you never again take your time for granted.
You're not going to sit around.
Exactly. You don't languish in a comfortable studio debating snare drum tones for 6 weeks. You hit record and you play like your life depends on it.
And that sprint pays off yet again. Songs of Man lands on the long list for the 2011 Polaris Music Prize. Earning 2 Polaris nods for their only 2 full-length albums proves that this newly formed ensemble wasn't just loud, they were incredibly tight.
They had forged a unified, critically resonant voice out of sheer adversity.
But you just painted the picture perfectly a second ago. You sprinted for 12 days to record a highly complex album with 6 other people, right after fighting a life-threatening illness.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That kind of pressure cooker creates absolute diamonds, but it also creates inevitable cracks.
You just can't sustain that exact level of intensity forever.
No, you can't. When you're sprinting that hard, utilizing all that pent-up energy, the fuel eventually burns off. And that leads to a necessary metamorphosis.
Right.
Let's look at the timeline as we move into 2012, because the structure of the band begins to fundamentally shift. In January of 2012, lead singer Simone Schmidt begins performing and releasing music under a new solo project called Fiverr.
Which is the most natural mechanical reaction to the preceding years, honestly.
Why do you say that?
Well, when you're the lead singer in a 7-piece band, every single musical decision is a negotiation. You have to leave sonic room for the drums, the bass, the electric guitar, the organ, the pedal steel.
That's a crowded room.
Exactly. Launching Fiverr was a necessary escape valve. It allowed Schmidt to return to a specific kind of creative autonomy, to explore quiet spaces and singular visions that a massive, roaring ensemble simply cannot accommodate.
You just need space to hear yourself think again. But the splintering doesn't stop with a solo side project. By October of 2012, Schmidt, along with bass player Kyle Porter and electric guitarist Paul Mortimer.
So a huge core chunk of the $100 lineup.
Right. They announced they have formed a brand new band. They bring in a new drummer named Simone TB, and they call themselves the Highest Order.
A great name.
And crucially, they explicitly pivot away from standard alternative country. They announce themselves as a psychedelic country band.
That is a massive mechanical shift in how the music actually operates.
Tell me more about that. Like, what does that actually mean for the listener?
Well, traditional country music grounds you in literal, linear storytelling. It's usually a narrative about a tangible thing, a broken heart, a hometown, a specific memory. The instruments are clean and recognizable.
Okay, sure.
But psychedelic country takes those same twangy acoustic guitars and just warps them. You run the instruments through tape delays, you coat the vocals in heavy reverb, and you untether the lyrics from linear reality.
Wow. Okay.
You go from sitting on a wooden porch to floating in orbit. It's moving from the grounded soil to the experimental stratosphere.
So what does this all mean? If you're looking at this strictly through the lens of a traditional music biography, you might hit the year 2012 and think, oh, what a shame, the band broke up, the timeline is over.
Which is how most people would read it.
Right. But I want you, the listener, to reevaluate how we measure the lifespan and success of a creative project. $100 wasn't a static monument built to stand in the town square for 40 years. It was a chrysalis.
Oh, I love that analogy.
It was this protective, temporary shell built out of absolute necessity after a trauma, designed specifically to foster growth, provide community, and ensure survival.
And once the healing was done,
And the growth was complete, the shell naturally had to break open so the new iterations could fly out.
this raises an important question about how we view longevity, not just in art, but in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
The ending of $100 wasn't a failure to endure. It was a highly successful, completed mission. They successfully transitioned from an intense, trauma-forged alt-country group into branching paths that yielded the distinct solo work of Fiverr and the boundary-pushing psychedelic explorations of the highest order.
If you look at your own life, whether it's a job you had for a few years, a creative partnership, or a specific phase of a relationship, we're so often taught that longevity equals success.
We really are.
If a band doesn't last for decades and do a massive stadium reunion tour, we assume they failed. If you don't stay at a company for 20 years, the job was a wash.
But that completely misunderstands the mechanics of growth. Not every project has to last forever to be a massive success.
Not at all.
Sometimes, a project's ultimate value is simply to act as the crucible. It forms your skills, helps you survive a deeply tough period, and serves as the launchpad into your next phase. The absolute highest purpose of $100 was to keep its members alive creatively and then become Fiverr in the highest order.
What an incredible trajectory to pull from such concise history. We started with a deeply vulnerable acoustic duo facing the total halt of a leukemia diagnosis. We watched them turn their medical isolation into a coiled spring, winding up a stockpile of heavy, vital songs.
We saw the explosive kinetic release of that spring, drafting an entire community of musicians to expand into a lush, dynamic 7-piece ensemble.
Yeah.
They ran a musical sprint, furiously recording 2 critically acclaimed Polaris-nominated albums by playing live off the floor. It was a loud, undeniable proof of life.
And finally, they realized the structure they had built had served its purpose. The pressure cooker had done its job, allowing them to splinter off, find their autonomy again, and seed entirely new psychedelic genres across the Canadian music landscape.
It completely dismantles the standard narrative. It proves that sometimes the most successful thing a band can do is evolve out of existence.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Something that wasn't explicitly answered in the source text, but echoes through this entire evolution.
Let's hear it.
When a band splinters, changes its name, and fundamentally shifts its genre, like moving from grounded alternative country to echoing psychedelic country, but bringing many of the exact same human beings along for the ride, how much of the original band's soul actually remains?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Is a band defined by its people, the specific shared trauma they survive together, or is it defined strictly by the physical sound waves it produces?
It's a brilliant, lingering question. If the people are the same but the mechanics change, are you hearing a new band? Or just a new chapter of the same soul? A great puzzle to take with you into your own creative endeavors.
Thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning those standard narratives, and keep seeking out those hidden aha moments in your own reading. We will catch you next time.